Hi guys, I generally have a great deal of respect for Lewis Goodall, the host of his own show on LBC and the co-host of the Newsagents podcast. He usually is honest in his approach to politicians and their positions, but perhaps he's spending too much time on the same outlet that gave Nigel Farage his own show, and some of the disingenuous reporting is rubbing off on him. Lewis grilled Darren Jones, a government minister, over the Prime Minister's use of the term far-right bandwagon some months back, following calls for a public inquiry into Pakistani grooming gangs. Now, Jones struggled to defend the Prime Minister's U-turn as he was pushed by Lewis, but the Prime Minister was right, and I'll explain why in just a moment.
He did not need to suggest that those calling for an inquiry were jumping on the bandwagon of the far right. He didn't need to do that. He did it. Will he be apologising to those people, and indeed to the victims, in delaying this inquiry for so long?
Well, look, the point he was making at the time was that this work needed to happen first before you could take informed decisions. It's just a matter of fact that at that time, this review by Baroness Casey had not been done. It has now been done.
Then why did he call it a far-right bandwagon? Why did he say it was a far-right bandwagon? Because that's not the point that he was making at the time. He wasn't just saying, let's just wait and see. He used those words. Why?
Well, because, you know, the actors from that space in our politics
were correct.
We're making, well, on the basis of the Baroness Casey review, we are now doing a national inquiry. But as I say, you can't
they were right.
You can't announce national inquiries based on Twitter and people kind of shouting at you. As I say, you've got to do these things properly. That has been done properly in a methodical, robust way, and that has now led to the Prime Minister's conclusion that there will be a national inquiry, and that's the right thing to do.
I'm very disappointed with Lewis here suggesting that Nigel Farage in particular, he didn't name Nigel Farage of course, but that's who we're talking about, deserves an apology for suggesting that Nigel Farage was jumping on board a right-wing bandwagon, along with maybe Kemi Badenoch, but Kemi Badenoch probably didn't know what was happening, so let's leave her aside for a moment. Of course, the Conservatives couldn't be bothered to implement the findings of the J report, the previous inquiry. They decided not to implement those measures. So whatever the Tories have to say about this, they're of course hypocrites. But when we, including myself, were criticising Nigel Farage for jumping on board a right-wing bandwagon, the Prime Minister was correct, because what Farage was talking about was an investigation into just these, the grooming gang, the Pakistani grooming gangs, because it was a right-wing bandwagon, because the people who were pushing it did not care one iota about other victims. They were not saying, let's implement the measures of the J inquiry, implement the findings, I should say, and then let's investigate Pakistani grooming gangs. No. They were saying, let's forget about previous inquiries and let's focus only on this. So they were focusing only on one particular demographic. They didn't give a crap about anyone else. So of course it was a right-wing bandwagon. The right-wing don't give a crap about any other victims. They only pretend to care about the ones that were victims of these Pakistani individuals. They pretend to care about those people. Kemi Badenoch went and met with some of them. Unfortunately, some of them didn't ask her, why didn't you implement the findings of the J report? Kemi Badenoch was just trying to take advantage of the situation, along with Farage and others. Now they've got their way. There's going to be an inquiry. But the government need to be clear about this and say, look, we didn't do this because of Nigel Farage. We didn't do this because of the Tories, because they obviously don't care about the victims unless it's a specific group of victims. You know, they care about victims in a limited and specific way. We're doing it because it was the right thing to do. But it looks like a U-turn as a result of pressure from the far right and from Nigel Farage and from Kemi Badenoch. Once again, Kemi Badenoch and Nigel Farage do not care about the victims unless it's in a limited and specific way. They were not calling for and this is the evidence, they were not calling for the findings of the J inquiry to be implemented. They were not saying, let's implement these changes in society, in the police, in social services, and then once that's done, let's look at the possibility of another inquiry, because inquiries take a long time, and there's the possibility that if you start a new inquiry, you won't have the resources to implement the findings of the previous one. So the previous one is thrown in the bin. To satisfy who? To satisfy Kemi Badenoch and Nigel Farage, it seems. Are the victims of the previous inquiry, that was set up to protect those victims or to implement changes for those victims, what's going to happen to them? Are they going to be listened to, or have they been forgotten? So once again, an inquiry is extremely expensive. It takes a lot of time. It requires a lot of effort, but some of that effort will have to be taken away from the implementation of the findings of the previous inquiry. Now, is Nigel Farage and Kemi Badenoch going to talk about that? Probably not. The government was right. Keir Starmer was right to say that there are individuals jumping on a right-wing bandwagon. And unfortunately, you have the media siding with Nigel Farage and Kemi Badenoch, and a government minister here, it seems, too afraid to call them out, to call out both the media and Nigel Farage and Kemi Badenoch. It's pathetic. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.